Good morning, everybody. So what we'll do here is we'll finish off the lesson about Adenauer and the Christian Democratic Union that we started last week. I'll quickly just take you through, just do a very quick recap through the slides that we covered in the last lesson, and then we'll spend more time on finishing it off. So, Adenauer and the CDU. I think I've received the mock examination feedback from most of you. If you haven't sent me your feedback, can you please make sure you do that today? Thank you. There's just a reminder of the reading. Remember that throughout this slideshow and on the notes, you've got references to the Williamson book, and you've got a hard copy of Williamson. You've also got a hard copy of the key chapter from the Turner book, and although I haven't given you my notes from that, haven't written any notes on that yet, you've got my annotations and underlining in the Williamson chapter. So the Williamson chapter and the Turner chapter, so make sure you use those. And those are the list of questions from this fourth depth study, and I've highlighted the two that you could get on Adenauer. Very, very similar questions, almost identical questions, those. One is in the revision guide, and the other is the second specimen paper. So make sure you go to both of those sources, because the revision guide gives you annotations, and it gives you the modelled answer. The specimen paper gives you the indicative content at the back of the mark scheme. And there's the flip learning for the lesson. There's the mind map that you were working on. Basically, in the first lesson, we covered Adenauer, his early career, his vision, the birth of the CDU, and we covered the elections. And where we're going to pick it up in a second is from Western integration, taking you through the relations with East Germany, military issues, and then an overall assessment. Just to let you know, at the end of this video, I will be setting you your next essay. That will be essay number 9. You've done 8 essays so far, 6 of them plus the 2 that you did for the mock exam. So this next essay will be essay 9, and I'll explain that task and give you the deadline at the end of this video. Okay, so we covered Adenauer's early career. Remember, he was already an elderly man when he became Chancellor of Germany in 1949 to 63. We covered a little bit of background about his career going back to the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919. And we looked at his political vision. Obviously, the key characteristic was that he really wanted to build strong relationships with France, and that was a significant break with Germany's history ever since 1871. Very determined to rid Germany of Prussia's militarism, and he was obviously a key player in the formation of West Germany. So in that background that we've done so far, he drafted Law Number 46, which dismantled the Prussian state. That was an Allied Control Council law. And of course, he was the chair of the Parliamentary Council that wrote the basic law, the West German Constitution. So Mayor of Cologne, turned to national politics after World War II, one of the leading founders of the Christian Democratic Union, which aimed to unite the Catholics and Protestants, the values of liberal conservatism. We talked about how he did not want to just ditch the old Weimar Republic constitution. He wanted to take what was good, what worked well, and he wanted to develop it and build on it and improve on it. In particular, he saw the CDU as a key mission was uniting the various class divisions, religious divisions, and ideological groups, something which the Weimar Republic had failed to do. Ultimately, though, in terms of the political spectrum, it was centre-right in its politics. It a key central aspect of the CDU was that it saw itself as the market policeman, based on the ideas of Ludwig Erhard, who created what was called the social market economy. Basically a capitalist economy, but policed by the state, and strongly believing that sort of unbridled, uncontrolled capitalism, such as had happened in Germany in the 1920s, had resulted in Hitler taking power, and that therefore had to be prevented. But the CDU were not a left-wing party. There was very solid differences between the CDU and the SPD, which we'll be developing in the next lesson. Originally, it was a party, the CDU, across the whole of Germany, but of course in August 1947 the Soviets pretty much incorporated the CDU, moved the CDU, made it compliant as part of their move to make sure the SED became the dominant party in the eastern zones, and as a result of that, the CDU in the east, led by Jakob Kaiser, who later defected in the west. The CDU, led by Adenauer in the west, of course, then focused solely on politics in the western part of Germany. They saw that they had no influence in the eastern part of Germany. We then looked at the elections. The first elections of the new West Germany were in 1949. Because the CDU had the backing of the Catholic Church, and remember also that the CDU, just zooming in on that, had the backing of the CSU, which was the Bavarian version of the CDU. So you often see books talk about the CDU stroke CSU. All throughout this period, those two parties worked in tandem, and that therefore helped give the CDU much of the Catholic backing. And in the first elections, that was crucial. The first election was largely fought on economic issues. The SPD proposed a traditional socialist economic system with strong state intervention. The CDU very much proposed this new social market economy, the idea of market policemen. And it was a close call, a closely won election. The CDU got 31%, SPD 29%. Neither, therefore, had a majority, but the CDU effectively was able to form a coalition with the FDP, the Free Democratic Party. And that was a fairly, throughout this period in the 1950s, we'll do more on the elections, but the CDU and FDP coalition against the SPD was a fairly regular coalition that was operating in politics at this time. Okay, that's talked about on that slide. So Adenauer, by a narrow margin, was voted as the first Chancellor of Germany, and we, of course, now know with hindsight that he held that position until 1963, and the CDU actually stayed in power. It wasn't until 1969 that the SPD eventually took office. So for the first 20 years, the CDU were the governing party of the new West German state. And this point, I think, that we reached at the end of last lesson. So let's get into a little bit more detail on this. So in the late 1940s, we've done the context. The Cold War began as a result of tensions between the West and the Soviet Union. Very much sparked with the Berlin blockade crisis. With those Cold War tensions, the Western allies, now falling out with the Soviet Union, obviously were looking to court a political party in West Germany, and Adenauer saw that as an opportunity. So the CDU began to find greater favour with the Western occupying powers of the USA, Britain and France. That was partly due to Adenauer's policies, because they were centre-right they were very much based on capitalist principles. So of course the Americans very much supported that the social market economy put forward by Erhard. But it was also due to the fact that Adenauer was strongly opposed to the German Democratic Republic and to any form of German unification that would require compromise with the German Communist Party in East Germany. So, as you know, the German Communist Party was called the SED. Strictly speaking, although East Germany was a pluralist democracy, that means that the multiple parties were allowed to operate. In actual fact, East Germany, run by Walter Ulbricht, who's pictured there, was essentially a dictatorship under the SED. Okay, key points here are, so I'll just make that a little bit, my pen a little bit narrower for you there. So East Germany was essentially a dictatorship under the SED, so that in East German elections, parties were effectively presented with a single list of parties, all effectively putting out the same policies, with a lot of pressure and intimidation, which guaranteed the SED 60% of the vote. The other East German political parties had to accept that situation. Otherwise, they would not be allowed to continue to exist. Okay, so I think this was actually the slide where we finished last lesson. So let's just zoom into these. Okay, so Adenauer, point number one. Adenauer believed that the future survival and prosperity of both West Germany and Western Europe as a whole required greater economic and political cooperation between West Germany and Western Europe. That as a new country, looking at the map here, as a new country, West Germany, if it was going to survive for the future, it needed to cooperate with other Western European countries, in particular France. And that, of course, meant that he had to work hard to overcome French fears, because France, of course, had been invaded by Germany in 1871 and in 1914 and again in 1940. So one of the one of the first events in 1951, as you can see there on the next bullet point, was that in 1951 West Germany joined what was called the European Coal and Steel Community, and then in 1957 joined the European Economic Community. Now we'll cover that in more detail in a later lesson when we move back onto the Brett study. But basically this was seen to be the sort of first major step that West Germany economically needed to start working towards a common trade agreements with the West. And that was really the beginning of what we have today with the European Community. So those sorts of ideals about building a common relationship, in particular with France, laid the groundwork for what today we call the European Union. Next point, Adenauer's economic and social insurance policies, that was part of the social market economy, led to greater social mobility. A key feature of West Germany was social mobility, largely because Adenauer believed it was essential that the West German state provide welfare, social insurance for those people who were not well enough off to help themselves, including a great deal of emphasis on gender, on supporting women. So again, what we'll do is we'll pick that up and look at that in more detail when we do the Brett study, but you just need to be aware of that as a key feature as we do the step study. Okay, so Western European integration. Pulling back. Moving on to military issues. Okay, so again, what I would do, you can pause this video at any point. So if I were you, I'd actually pause. You've got the page references where you can pick up and read the relevant sections from Williamson. So there's a useful section in Williamson on page 39, and then page 58 to 59, 56, and 61 to 62. So pick up those references and pause after this particular slide. So the key points as follows. Key point is that the situation very, very quickly changed. At the beginning, 1959, so 1949 to 1950, taking that sort of context of the fact that Germany had, in its history, 3 times previously attacked France, 1871, 1914 and 1940, but had also attacked Russia twice in its history, of course in 1914 and then again in 1941. So between them, France and the USSR shared a common fear of a remilitarized German nation. And that was quite significant in the early years after World War II. So while relations were breaking down between Britain and America on one side and Russia in the other, France, in a sense, was a bridge. France kind of stood between the two, although France identified with Britain and America because they were the allies, the Western allies that had won the war, and France was a capitalist nation, not a communist nation. At the same time, France could identify with Russian fear. So they were both understandably afraid of a remilitarized nation. And for that reason, in November 1949, when Adenauer, one of the first things he did is he signed the Petersburg Agreement, which you can read about in Williamson on page 39. And that signing, it was West Germany signing it with the Allied control, with the Allied High Commission. That was basically what was left of the Allied Control Council without the Soviet Union. And effectively it was agreed that the new West German state would be committed to demilitarization, that the West Germany was not going to build up its own army, that the new West German state would use its budget to provide welfare to look after its citizens. That was agreed at the Petersburg Agreement of November 1949. However, that situation very quickly changed because of the developing international situation. So obviously the Cold War, tensions really increased in 1948 to 49 because of the Berlin blockade. And then suddenly in 1950, the tensions escalated to a new high level with the Korean War. Now, basically, there's a map here on the right, so just have a quick look at that. Basically, Korea over on the other side of the world. So just sort of highlight where Korea was. There's Korea. As you can see, it was a peninsula off the mainland of China. Well, basically, at the end of the World War II, Korea was divided in a similar way that had happened to Vietnam, where North Korea fell under the rule of the North Korean Communist Party, and South Korea was basically under the rule of Korean nationalist parties, right-wing parties. Don't need to go into the details of internal Korean politics. The important thing to understand is that Korea became a divided nation. And South Korea was supported by the Americans, and North Korea was supported by the Chinese. And China, in 1949, had become a communist country. So on the other side of the world, you've got a very similar situation to what has happened with Germany. Because Germany also was divided, not between North and South, but it was divided between East and West, in which one half of the country was supported by a communist mother country. In the case of Germany, it was the Soviet Union. Obviously, in the case of North Korea, it was China. And in which the other half of the country, for West Germany, it was supported by the Americans, the British and the French. In the case of South Korea, supported very much by the Americans. So pulling back to the notes. What happened in 1950? War broke out between North Korea and South Korea. And that had a real ripple effect over to Germany, because Adenauer, the leader of West Germany, believed that the Korean War might encourage East Germany to do the same, to do what North Korea had done. I mean, North Korea basically had invaded non-communist South Korea. And Adenauer was worried that Walter Ulbricht, the leader of East Germany, might now be motivated to do a copycat war and attack West Germany in order to create a unified communist Germany. So that ripple effect, that fear, those anxieties that developed in West Germany now suddenly became very significant in Germany. How did that impact on politics? This, therefore, resulted in Adenauer in 1950 changing his position. So in 1949, he had signed up to the Petersburg Agreement, but now he proposed the formation of a West German army of 150,000 men. Now, that proposal was very popular with the West Germans, the people of West Germany, particularly the middle class West Germans, who were very fearful of, well, if East Germany were to attack West Germany and were to win that war, then of course the whole of Germany would become communist, and the West German middle classes would lose their wealth. However, it was not as simple as that. There were many West Germans who disagreed with Adenauer as well. And in particular, the leader of the Social Democrats in West Germany, Schumacher, and we'll do this next lesson, who was also backed by Germany's churches, because there was a division there. The churches had traditionally backed Adenauer, but on this particular stance, the churches started to support Schumacher, and also from the trade unions, for fairly obvious reasons, because if suddenly West Germany is going to build up its own army, that's going to cost a lot of money, and it will have to divert expenditure, government expenditure, away from welfare systems, which are looking after rebuilding the lives of a war-torn population, improving their well-being, and diverting that money into building up an army. So the trade unions, the churches, were unhappy at the thought of West Germany developing its own army to defend itself against a possible attack by East Germany. So that change in context then helps us understand the second election, which happened in 1953. Now, unlike the 1949 election, that was largely fought over economic issues, as we said, should Germany have a social market economy, which is what the CDU wanted, or should it have a traditional state-run socialist economy, which is what the SPD wanted? By 1953, the agenda had changed, and so the election campaign in 1953 was primarily fought on this big debate about rearmament. Now, by that point, by 1953, Erhard's social market economy was starting to reap fruit. Economic recovery in West Germany was well underway, and Adenauer's popularity with the West German people therefore showed in that election result. Now remember, in 1949 the CDU only won with 31% of the vote, and it wasn't enough to govern by themselves. Now in this new election in 1953, with Adenauer's boosted popularity, the SDU, so the CDU vote, increased to 45% of the vote. And that's a massive increase on the vote in the 1949 election. Still not enough to achieve an overall majority, though, but nevertheless, clear sign that Adenauer's economic policies were working. And also clearly evidence of the fact that Adenauer's proposal to form a West German army, although unpopular with some groups, such as the working classes and the trade unions, nevertheless, it is binding the West German middle classes to the CDU. So, implications of that. Again, page references there for you to pick up, so at any point just pause this video and read the relevant pages from Williamson. So Adenauer now had the mandate. A mandate means sort of like the go-ahead given to him by a vote. Adenauer had the mandate to push ahead with his plans for a West German army. He's now won that election with 45% of the vote. Although this took time and it didn't happen overnight, because he needed still to overcome French fears. Okay, so we must not forget the fact that in the background you've got France, who is very, very anxious about suddenly having it's only been less than 10 years since the death of Hitler and the end of World War II. So in the minds of many French people, they're still very much thinking of Germany as a country that has attacked us 3 times since 1871. And now, within 10 years of the end of World War II and the death of Hitler and the ending of the Nazi regime, suddenly there is this big conversation what this new West German country that it had been agreed at Potsdam and again at Petersburg should not have its own army, and now suddenly there is the proposal that it needs to have its army for defensive reasons against a threat from East Germany, but nevertheless the French are anxious about that particular proposal. So what then happened? Eventually, on the 5th of May 1955, a general treaty was signed. Sometimes it's called the German Treaty. And basically what it did is it gave Germany complete sovereignty over its foreign policy. Now remember, with the Basic Law of 1949, when the Constitution was worked out, it was agreed that that in terms of foreign policy, Germany was still subject to the Western allies, the British, the French and the Americans, as had been agreed at Potsdam, albeit without the Soviet Union because of the beginning of the Cold War. And so by the Basic Law, West Germany had a cabinet of ministers, but for example, that new West German government was not allowed to have a foreign minister. So in this early years, in the early 1950s, Adenauer as Chancellor pretty much doubled up and was the voice of the West German government on foreign policy issues. But West Germany was not allowed to have a say in foreign policy. Now that changed on the 5th of May 1955. It was agreed with the General Treaty that from now on the new West German government could have a foreign minister, and it was agreed that Germany could join NATO. Now you know what the NATO is. I know you've been doing the Cold War in the other unit, so I don't want to go into the details of that, but remember that the NATO was basically a military organisation of the Western European nations and America, a defensive military alliance that had been formed after World War II. And Germany had not been allowed to belong to NATO, quite understandably, because Germany did not have its own army, and Germany was still being treated as an enemy state, in effect, under foreign occupation. But now it was agreed that Germany could join NATO. So that effectively gave the go-ahead, once again, for Germany to have its own military force. Although it was agreed that the British, the French and the Americans would still maintain a military presence in West Germany. So there were strings attached. So although West Germany can now form its own army, the British, the French and the Americans will still maintain a military presence in West Germany. And Berlin's special status that had been decided at Potsdam was still unchanged. Okay, so that was the significance of the General Treaty. A few extra points there. So NATO had originally been formed back in April 1949. You've got the member nations there in response to fear of the USSR. It was a military bloc, an agreement that an armed attack on any one of its members would be regarded as an attack on all NATO countries. So why was it significant that West Germany should be allowed to join NATO? Well, basically, it established the FRG, West Germany now, as not just a key economic member of the Western European community. Remember, that had been agreed in 1951 when she joined the European Coal and Steel Community, and it had been agreed even with the creation of Bizonia, but now it has been agreed that she will be a military member of the Western European Alliance. And it confirmed West Germany, therefore, as a firm part of what we call the Western Bloc. So a bloc, B-L-O-C, it's not a spelling mistake, a bloc is a coming together of a group of nations who share a common purpose. And of course, that common purpose was opposition to the Soviet Union and communist Eastern Europe. Incidentally, make sure you read the detail that goes beneath the images and sources on the right-hand side of these slides. Okay, so that's Western integration, and now let's develop a bit more about relations with the GDR, relations with the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. And we'll start off with this key agreement, or this key principle that's called the Hallstein Doctrine. So again, at this point, you may just want to pause the video and just go to Williamson and just read through about this on pages 46 to 47. Now, what this is about is about where did Adenauer stand in terms of the existence of East Germany? Because when West Germany came into existence in 1949, what very quickly happened then is East Germany was formed shortly afterwards, led by Walter Ulbricht, a separate East Germany. Now, Adenauer was constantly under criticism because whenever everything he did in terms of promoting West Germany and developing West Germany, there were many Germans who said, well, you are actually not working in the interests of Germany because you are dividing Germany by developing a separate Western German state. You are making it more difficult in the future for Germany to become united again. And that what you should be doing is you should be working to create a united Germany rather than a separate West Germany. So the way Adenauer responded to those criticisms, he always stuck to the line, I do not recognise Eastern Germany. He always said, my state, West Germany, the West German state that was created in 1949, represents, and the key words are here, it represents the legitimate continuation of the old united German Reich. And he claimed that only West Germany alone was the germ cell for a future unified Germany. So By saying that, he basically said East Germany is not a legitimate nation. West Germany is a legitimate nation, and it will be the germ cell of an eventual united Germany. What we have to do is we have to draw East Germans. We have to persuade East Germans that to reject their nation, and that they want to be part of the West German nation. And that notion is often called the magnet theory, that if we can promote a strong, prosperous West Germany, and we do not recognise East Germany as a legitimate legal state, that the people, the Germans living in East Germany, will be unhappy with that situation. They will want East Germany to become part of West Germany, and eventually we'll reach a situation where the East German state will crumble and the West German state will expand to bring back East Germany under its control. The problem is, though, Adenauer was alone in saying, I don't recognise East Germany, because the Soviet Union recognised the existence of East Germany as a sovereign, legitimate nation. And that worried Adenauer, because he was really worried that other countries would follow suit in simple ways. For example, take any country. Let's say, for example, if Britain makes a trading deal with East Germany, by implication, they have recognised the existence of the East German state. So Adenauer was very determined to keep East Germany isolated, that other countries other than the USSR did not recognise the legitimate right of East Germany as a sovereign nation. So what Adenauer did is he published the Hallstein Doctrine. Hallstein was an academic, a university academic. He was the first president of the EEC, and he was one of the founding fathers of the European Union. And he was given the position as State Secretary of the new Foreign Office that was created. And Professor Hallstein, basically in his Doctrine, a doctrine is a written document, asserted that if any other nation apart from the USSR diplomatically recognises the right of East Germany to exist, the new West German state will regard that to be a hostile act, an aggressive act against West Germany. Okay, almost like an act of war. Now, clearly, West Germany was not in a position of strength to wage war against other nations that did that, but what West Germany did have as its main weapon was its economic strength, because as we said, and we'll develop this more in a later lesson, there was this economic boom, what we call the economic miracle of the 1950s that was happening as a result of Erhard's social market economy. So that really was West Germany's main weapon behind the Hallstein Doctrine, because effectively it was saying if any other country recognises East Germany, then West Germany will not trade with you. We will impose economic sanctions. And as soon as the Hallstein Doctrine was announced, they made a point of that. So, for example, Yugoslavia and Cuba at different points recognised the existence of East Germany by signing trade agreements with East Germany. Immediately, West Germany responded by cancelling their own trade agreements with Yugoslavia and Cuba. And that really hurt Yugoslavia and Cuba, because West Germany was a much more prosperous country than East Germany. So it made the international community sit up and notice and think, do we really want to recognise the existence of East Germany? So it made East Germany more and more isolated. So why was that important? The Hallstein Doctrine, along with the integration of West Germany into NATO that we've already spoken about, and the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961, which really solidified the Cold War. You don't need to know about the Berlin Wall crisis, because this depth study only goes up to 1960, but nevertheless it was significant because it solidified the Cold War. It made it permanent in a sense, or it certainly made it a long-term issue. So the Hallstein Doctrine, along with West Germany being integrated into NATO, confirmed that in the long term, Germany was going to be a divided country. That what had originally been talked about at Potsdam as effectively only a temporary arrangement clearly was not going to go away now in the short term. Secondly, the Hallstein Doctrine was important because it provoked a response by East Germany. East Germany had to respond. They were now economically isolated. Other countries around the world did not want to create economic ties with East Germany, so Ulbricht, the leader of East Germany, had little choice other than to turn to the Soviet Union, effectively the mother country, the only country that had recognised Eastern Germany. So economic ties with the Soviet Union, between the Soviet Union and East Germany, were strengthened. And that therefore integrated East Germany more fully into the Soviet bloc. So what you've got is East Germany becoming more integrated into the Soviet bloc, and West Germany more integrated into the Western bloc. And with that, therefore, future reunification of Germany was increasingly unlikely. And that was symbolically confirmed in 1961 by the crisis that led to Berlin, the city at the centre of the Cold War, literally being physically split into two by a wall being built through the middle of it. And so this notion of the division of Germany is now completely tied up in with the Cold War. So therefore, German reunification will not be able to happen until the Cold War ends, which, of course, as historians, we can now see and understand, because that is what happened in 1989 to 1990. So the Hallstein Doctrine was very damaging in a sense. It strengthened West Germany's ties with the West, but it made it very almost impossible in the long term for a united Germany to happen again. And of course, many Germans wanted a united Germany. So the Hallstein Doctrine, although popular economically with the West, with Germans living in the Western Germany, but for Germans who wanted to have a united country, it was not popular. There were divided opinions about the Hallstein Doctrine. And we now know, of course, that when there was a change of government in 1969 and the SPD became the government of West Germany, the new Chancellor, Willy Brandt of the SPD, ended the Hallstein Doctrine. And that was a brave move as well, because what Brandt did is he officially recognised the existence of East Germany. But Brandt argued that by recognising the existence of East Germany, that made it more likely that the two countries would be able to start talking to each other. They would then be able to loosen their ties with the two blocs, and that would therefore make a future unification more possible. Very significant, the Hallstein Doctrine. Let's go back to the elections. So this is why understanding the elections, they happened every 4 years. We talked about 1949, largely fought over economic issues. 1953, largely fought over the rearmament issue. Then in 1957, another round of Bundestag elections. And this was the famous election where the CDU won an overall majority. So you might want to pause the video, have a quick read about it from Williamson, pages 62 to 63, and also on pages 63 to 65. So, the election campaign was fought by the Christian Democratic Union, by Adenauer's party, using the slogan, "No experiments." And you have to remember, by this point, Adenauer has been Chancellor of Germany since 1949, and the economic miracle, the economic revival of West Germany is absolutely well underway. I mean, the growth rate of the West German economy under Erhard's social market principles was astonishing. So basically, the CDU campaigned in these elections. They said, well, look, you, the German voters, have got to decide pretty much between are you going to carry on backing the CDU, or are you going to vote for the SPD? Now, Schumacher has died, and the new leader of the SPD was a politician called Erich Ollenhauer. And the campaign was fought on this no experiments. It's basically saying, do you want to take a risk by voting for the SPD? Because the SPD will bring in a left-wing economy, an economy run by socialist principles. Clearly, our social market economy, which is a capitalist economy with the government acting as market policeman, is working. Do you want to take that risk of gambling away our economic growth by supporting the SPD? So that was the line that was taken in the elections, and it worked. The CDU achieved a massive victory. They won 50.2% of the vote, so they got their outright majority, and that therefore freed Adenauer from his partnership with the FPD. There's no photograph there of Meyer for some reason, but up until now, to have that majority, the CDU had always had to basically form a coalition with the FDP, but they're now freed from that. He can, for the first time, govern alone. So it was a clear endorsement. The vote was a clear endorsement by the West German public that they approved of the direction that Adenauer was taking the West Germany in. Adenauer fought one further election 4 years later in 1961. He won it again. So that was the fourth election campaign that the CDU won. They won it in 1949 with 31%, and then 1953 they got 45%. 1957 they got the overall majority of 50%, and they won again in 1961. But in 1961 they lost their majority. They still were the most popular party by a long way, but they did lose their majority, and so Adenauer had to rebuild a coalition with the FDP again in 1961. Adenauer finally stepped down in 1963 at the age of 87 years old. He'd been Chancellor of the FRG for 14 years to that point. So, assessment of Adenauer. Approaching the end now. Difficult to overstate his impact, which was huge. There is a poster from the 1957 election campaign. As you can see, keine Experimenter, no experiments. That was the slogan used in the election campaign. So Adenauer's economic and social policies, which, again, don't be thinking to yourself, I don't really know enough about them. We will go into more detail of those when we look at revisit the breadth study units in a couple of weeks. But those economic and social policies had effectively set the basis for West Germany's development all the way, not just in the 1950s when Adenauer was Chancellor, but all the way up to 1990 when Germany finally reunified again. And we'll do more on this, but the SPD, they had to basically change. They recognised that that Adenauer's policies were so popular, so the SPD realised that they had to basically change their line, and so even the SPD were prepared to modify their traditional socialist policies and build in aspects of the social market economy into their own manifesto. But we'll do that in a subsequent lesson. So Adenauer's foreign policy was, of course, important because it led to the formation of the EEC in 1957. West Germany had been now integrated into NATO and, of course, forged a new peaceful relationship with France. So we said the ECSC, the European Coal and Steel Community, and, of course, the German treaty and the fact that France had given recognition to the fact that West Germany could have its own army. But on the downside, that same foreign policy had also ensured for the long term Germany would continue to be divided between the democratic West Germany and the undemocratic communist East Germany, and that was not going to go away. So with success comes division. With economic success comes division. West Germany is doing well, but the prospect of unification is not on the horizon in the short term at least. Most important of all, Adenauer and the CDU had built a stable and prosperous democracy. So economically, you've got the great miracle of the 1950s, astonishing rates of growth that we'll look at in a later lesson. You've got a model democracy that is clearly working well. You've got stable government that is working well. And that was very different from the Weimar Germany, where, although it was democratic, there was lack of stability. So the new West German state that Adenauer had played a key part in creating and then governing for 14 years was looked upon by the rest of the world as one of the most stable and prosperous democracies in the world. And this is 15 years since it had been destroyed at the end of World War II. And we can see that continued to be the case up to 1990 and beyond. I mean, West Germany is still today a very strong, prosperous, now unified country in the middle of Europe. So he achieved his goal of building a new Germany based on the values of the Weimar Republic, but with a more solid basis that would ensure its lasting success. So it's really important, remember, when you're writing about this in exams, is that you keep making comparisons with the Weimar Republic. Just a reminder there, the revision guide, which I have asked you, and I know you have all responded and said you've all got your copy of the revision guide. That's relevant. Flip learning for next lesson. We will move into, that's tomorrow's lesson, changes in the nature of the SPD. We've done a lot of talking about Schumacher's SPD. Schumacher was taken over by Ollenhainer, but we'll look at those changes in the lesson tomorrow, and then we'll move into the final topic, denazification. Now, your next essay. In that revision guide on page 34 to 35, seems a bit strange this, but I'm referring you to an essay about the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919. Section B essay, the second depth study. In that revision guide, that essay gets a level 5. Now, level 5, using the mark scheme from 2017, is effectively an A-star response. So that, I think if you read that will be pretty encouraging to you guys, because many of you certainly are capable of writing to that particular level. There's nothing there in that answer that you don't already know about. So read it and read the annotations that explains why it is a level 5 answer. Then, moving forward in the book, 30 odd pages, on pages 64 to 5, I think it is, there is another section B essay, but this is about this is for the fourth depth study, and the question is, to what extent does Konrad Adenauer deserve his reputation as the founding father of West German democracy in the years 1949 to 60? An essay of similar length, it's been annotated, but as you can see, this only achieves a level 4. So a level 4 encompasses a range of grades. It goes from basically a C to a grade A, but clearly it is not as strong as the previous essay that we looked at on the previous slide. So your next section B essay, essay number 9, that I want you to have written in the usual conditions, supervised, in exam conditions, which means you can't have your plan and notes with you, but you must attach your plan afterwards, is by Thursday the 15th of March. And what I want you to basically do, as is explained here, is it is that question: to what extent does Konrad Adenauer deserve his reputation as, quote, the founding father of West German democracy in the years 1949 to 60? In terms of preparation, read that level 4 modelled essay on pages 34 to 5. So I got that the wrong way around. I just suddenly noticed. Read the level 5. So that's a strong one, isn't it? Okay, read the level 5 modelled essay. And then read the level 4 modelled essay about to the question you're going to do on pages 64 to 5. Compare the two responses and think about why the Adenauer essay is not as strong as the German Revolution essay. And then your task, when you write your answer to that Adenauer question above, is to basically improve it from a level 4 to level 5. And clearly the opportunity to do that is to build in more knowledge, more precise information to really show me that you have been reading Williamson and in particular Turner, and look at all those ways to strengthen your answer to that question. So that's the end of this. Okay, so in our next lesson we'll do Schumacher and the SPD. So make sure you've done the flip learning for that, and hopefully that will be in school tomorrow rather than by means of another YouTube video, but we shall see. Hopefully that was useful to you. Thank you very much. Any questions on this at all? Can you remember to email me any questions? And everybody please in the group, can you please email me today to say that you have played this video and that you understand it. Any questions, put questions into your email, but I do need to know that you've actually played this video and learned from it. Thank you.